So ATAR, the story so far. I'm sure most of you have probably heard a little bit about ATAR. Hopefully you've talked a bit about it at school, maybe have had a bit of an understanding about it. So we're going to be breaking that down a bit further today. Some of you also might have heard of the term OP, which stands for overall position, and this was the system that we used before ATAR was implemented. So the 2019 graduates were the last year of students to go through the OP system in Queensland, and then ATAR was introduced for Year 12s in 2020. So because I graduated in 2021, I was the second cohort to go through the ATAR system. So when this change first came out, there was so many questions surrounding like what would this look like, what changes would there be, because there was changes to how assessment was run. Like the whole concept of external exams was quite new, and that was quite a daunting thought of like what are these external exams even going to look like, and all of these changes that they made to the system. And there was all of these different thoughts and opinions about it. So some people said it'll be more exams, but some people said it would be a better deal. They thought it might change the number of subjects. They thought it might raise academic standards. There was just all of these, as there always is in the media, there's always all of these different opinions on what is ATAR and what it'll look like. But the awesome news for you guys is that ATAR's actually been in place for a couple of years now. So we've got a lot of resources, we've got a lot of experience with what it looks like. And because I've been through it myself, hopefully I'll be able to provide some first-hand experience. So a quote we have from QTAC around what is an ATAR, what's the purpose of an ATAR. So the ATAR is the primary mechanism used nationally for tertiary admissions and indicates a student's position relative to other students. And that's from QTAC. So breaking this down a little bit, nationally, it's an Australian tertiary admission rank. So it's Australia-wide. So this is relevant. Your ATAR is relevant even if you're going to be applying to study in a state other than Queensland. And it's about tertiary admissions. So tertiary is like that higher order study, like university. So your ATAR is pretty much a tool to help you get into university. It's not the only way to get into university, but it is a way that a lot of people do get into university, especially if you're planning on studying shortly after graduating high school. So that's what the ATAR is. It's like a mechanism or a tool that we use that ranks kind of students based off like how they do in their subjects at school. And then the universities consider all of the ATARs when they're taking acceptances for like different courses. Another quote that we have, the ATAR is the single most important thing you will ever encounter and will absolutely dictate your life for the next several decades. Quoted from literally nobody ever. I know this can feel like the really dominant narrative, especially when you're in high school, in the middle of it, and it feels like all your teachers are talking about, which they're doing a great job to like prepare you, but it can also feel really overwhelming when you feel like, oh my goodness, like you're in the middle of all the stress of assessment and ATARs and trying to figure out what you want to do after high school. And it can feel like this ATAR, this one number is going to be like the absolute game changer. If I get a bad ATAR, if I drop some points in some of my assessments, then it's all over. I'm never going to get a job. I'm never going to get into uni, but that's absolutely not true. And I would just really like to encourage you guys that your ATAR isn't the be all and end all. If year 12 doesn't go quite how you expect it to, and your ATAR isn't enough to get you into the course that you want, there is pretty much always, there's other pathways, other options, other ways. The ATAR is just, like we're saying, one of those ways that you can get into university. So don't feel like your ATAR is going to dictate the rest of your life. That's not accurate at all. And even another point that I'll just make is that the QCE is actually separate from the ATAR, the QCE being the Queensland Certificate of Education, and then your ATAR. So you can actually still get a QCE even if you don't qualify for, or even if you don't go for an ATAR. So there's so many different options available. So yeah, I just really want to encourage you in that as we start out. So the ATAR, what is it? It's a number, and it's not a simple score. So if, for example, you're doing really well in all of your subjects, say, for example, you get like 80 out of 100 in all of your subjects, you might think that it just kind of like averages out. So you'll get like an ATAR of about 80, but that's actually not quite how it works. So the ATAR is a percentile rank, showing your ranking against other QCE students. and they're reported from, so it's a number between less than 30 and then it ranges up to 99.95. You actually cannot get an ATAR of 100, which is actually quite funny. So the highest ATAR is 99.95, and then if an individual is towards the lower end, their ATAR might be reported as less than 30. And they're reported in increments of 0.05. So for example, 67.75, 93.25. My ATAR was personally 94.90. So you can really see those increments of 0.05 coming in with how the ATARs are calculated. So you can't get 62.73 because it's only in those increments of 0.05. So that's kind of how the ranking is. The rankings go from less than 30 all the way up to 99.95, and you could get any number between those that's in an increment of 0.05. So what makes you eligible to get an ATAR? We're going to touch on that now, and hopefully you'll already have a bit of an understanding of this to know whether you're on track to get an ATAR, but we're just going to go over this to kind of clarify some of these things. So to be eligible for an ATAR, you must satisfactorily complete an English subject. So whether that's mainstream English or English literature, there's different options you can have there. But an interesting point of distinction is that English doesn't necessarily have to contribute to your ATAR. We'll get more on that later. But you do need to satisfactorily complete an English subject. So the ATAR is actually calculated from your best 5 scaled subject scores. So it's scaled. We're going to get into that a little bit later because they scale all of the different subject scores. What does that even mean? We'll explore shortly. But the takeaway here is that it's your best 5 scaled subject scores, and there's different ways that they can do this. So for example, at my school, I did 6 subjects, but only my best 5 counted towards my ATAR. And there's different varieties and combinations of how this could happen. So the first way is having 5 general subjects count towards your ATAR. This is what I had: English, general maths, biology, psychology, and drama. They're 5 general subjects, and those were the ones that counted towards my ATAR. So for me personally, outdoor sport and rec, which is an applied subject, was the one that didn't count towards my ATAR. But that actually, if I hadn't done so well in one of my general subjects, that one applied subject actually could have gone towards my ATAR. So an ATAR can also be calculated if you do 4 general subjects and an applied subject. So that's another way to qualify for an ATAR. But a quick note on applied subjects, they actually weight quite poorly. And we'll talk a little bit about scaling a bit later on. But it's important to keep in mind that if you're aiming for a bit of a higher ATAR, having an applied subject contribute towards your ATAR probably isn't the best approach. But it's really awesome that that is an option, and they can still contribute to your ATAR, but that's just a word of caution there. And another way is to do 4 general subjects and a cert or a higher vet qualification. So there's kind of that more mixed pathway there as well. It doesn't just have to be 5 typical general subjects. You could get an ATAR calculated based off 5 general subjects, or 4 general subjects and an applied subject, or the 4 general subjects and like a Cert 3 or other kind of vet qualification. So again, there are different ways to get your ATAR, and they all look slightly different for different people. So let's talk a little bit now about the process of calculating the ATAR. So let's say, for example, you study the following 6 general QCE subjects. So this theoretical person studied biology, psychology, English, legal studies, general maths, and geography. So they did 6 subjects, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they're all general subjects. So this person would have that first approach from the previous slide. They would have that... this one here, they would have 5 general subjects contributing to their ATAR because they haven't actually done an applied subject or like a vet qualification. So we know that for this person, it's definitely going to be 5 general subjects. But because they're doing 6 subjects, how do we know which of the subjects are going to actually contribute to it? So let's break it down a little bit. So let's say this person got a 78 out of 100 in biology, maybe a 70 in psychology, 65 for English, 65 for legal studies, a 58 for methods, and a 56 for geography. Here's some really awesome news. If you do 6 subjects that count towards your ATAR, that are eligible for your ATAR, they choose the top 5. So if you have one subject that goes completely not according to plan and it's just like a total disaster and you're stressing out about it and you do have those 6 subjects, that's actually okay because you actually kind of have that buffer subject that doesn't need to count towards your ATAR. So for this person, geography is actually not going to contribute to their ATAR because that was their lowest score. And this links into what I was saying earlier about how with English, you have to complete the English subject, but it doesn't necessarily have to go towards your ATAR. So if for this hypothetical person, English was their lowest score, then English would be the subject that was kind of knocked off and not counted towards their ATAR. So there is kind of space in that regard as well if you are doing those 6 subjects.